that, you're like, aha,
Yep.
oh my gosh, they just weren't thinking about that case.
Yeah.
But once you see that case, then you've got to say, yeah, of course, there's a risk of quid pro quo corruption.
Right.
And of course, legislatures should be allowed to address that risk, which they right now are not allowed. So right now, if you tried to give your member of Congress a $10,000 contribution, you wouldn't be allowed because the law says you can't give $10,000 to a candidate. They're limited at some, I think it's now 57. I can't remember what this year's number is,
right.
5,700 or something.
But presumably you can bribe as long as you're not giving the money directly to them, as long as you're giving the money to their super PAC and they're not coordinating, quote unquote, with the super PAC, you are allowed legally, essentially, to bribe them.
Right. You could give $1 billion. In fact, we saw a contribution of $1.6 billion to a super PAC. Now, you tell me how many people are giving $1.6 billion to super PACs and not having some understanding with someone about exactly what's going to come from that kind of contribution. So the point is, it's obvious that when we're talking about contributions of millions, multi-millions, billion-dollar contributions, there is a risk of quid pro quo corruption that legislatures and Congress ought to have the ability to regulate, but right now don't have the legal opportunity to regulate.
So let's look firstly at the narrow situation that we have here, as you've specifically defined. One, if this is something, if your campaign is successful, if you inspire someone to take this on, what would the legal pathway be to get to the Supreme Court? And then keep this at the back of your mind, because it really is a separate question, but I do want to address it, is then how do we get the legal system, the judiciary, out of the mindset that quid pro quo corruption is the only kind of corruption that we can address legally, because that seems to be the big impediment here in terms of like how we address this legally.
Okay. So the campaigns, we're doing, we're trying to walk and chew gum at the same time. So one thing we're doing is a video competition to try to break the conventional mindset around this issue. At the same time, we're exploring initiative petitions in Massachusetts and in Maine. And the basic question we're trying to determine is whether there's sufficient support in Massachusetts and Maine to support such an initiative, whether there are people on the ground who want to make it happen, and quite frankly, whether we could raise the money necessary to make it happen, because this is a pretty expensive process. And, the dream case, I'm not sure whether we'll get this, but the dream case is we have enough commitments of both support in the states and also support for funders to make it plausible to move in the next election cycle. Massachusetts, it's complicated because the Attorney General has to certify the petition before we're allowed to gather signatures. And she's already said it's unconstitutional under the Massachusetts Constitution. If we went with Massachusetts, we would try to convince her to the contrary, but, lawyers have a way of being fixed in their minds about what they think is right. Yeah. But in Maine, there is no impediment like that. So conceivably, we could, if there's the sufficient support, importantly, first in Maine and also then for funders to do this, we could begin to gather signatures in November in Maine and be on the 2024 ballot in Maine. And if it's on the 2024 ballot, look at polling. Everybody hates super PACs. Yeah. Even the far right hates super PACs. It's not a left-right issue. We just think, all of us think it's deeply corrupting. And indeed, the Republicans in 2020 discovered that outside spending was greater for Democrats than for Republicans. So it's not even a partisan benefit anymore. So we think we would plainly win in Maine. And once we won in Maine, you can be sure that it would be challenged immediately. And it would go to the First Circuit Court of Appeals, which is the federal circuit governing Maine and Massachusetts and Rhode Island and Puerto Rico. And then that court would have to decide. And we think the argument's strong. They would decide in our favor. And if they decide in our favor, then certainly the Supreme Court would take it up, because a bunch of other circuits followed the D.C. Circuit very shortly afterwards. And so it would be a clear split in the circuits, which is the kind of formula for getting the United States Supreme Court to take it up.
And then hopefully, as goes Maine, so goes SCOTUS.
Right. And so SCOTUS would then decide, and then decide under what standards. That's the great part of the second part of your question.
Yeah.
So you're right. So far, the Supreme Court has said the only basis for limiting campaign speech and contributions in this sense are thought of as speech, is quid pro quo corruption. A separate argument that we at Equal Citizens have been pushing for a long time is that actually, if you are a consistent originalist, and you applied originalism to the question of what standard should govern here, you plainly should allow the regulation of contributions to create a kind of improper dependence inside of our political system. Call that dependence corruption. Now, the originalist example here is just based on Justice Thomas. So Justice Thomas, first time in an actual concurring opinion, but he's released a number of dissents from denials, which is when they're trying to decide whether to hear a case, raising this point. But the basic argument he's made is, in the context of the First Amendment, there's a very famous case, New York Times versus Sullivan, that says if you're suing a public figure, you've got to show, if a public figure is suing you for defamation, he's got to show actual malice, which basically means the other side knows that they were lying about him.
Right.
And Thomas says that decision is basically just policy making by the Supreme Court. He says that what, in fact, the court should do is go back to the framing and ask the question, under the First Amendment in 1791, would there have been a different standard for defamation by a public figure versus anybody else? And his answer is no, there wouldn't have been a different standard. So therefore, that should be the law. Okay, that's the originalist move. And what we've been arguing is, okay, apply that move to campaign finance regulations. In 1791, what would the framers of the First Amendment have said if the legislature had tried to restrict the dependence of representatives on the money of a very few number of Americans? Basically, right. What would they have said to an anti-aristocratic regulation? What would they have said? They would have said, hell yes. Hell yes, because aristocracy is exactly what we're fighting against. So under the originalist standard, we've been trying to say, look, you ought to at least allow the kind of corruption regulation the framers would have allowed, and they would have allowed the corruption regulation of beyond quid pro quo corruption. They would have allowed quid pro quo, but beyond quid pro quo. Now, that argument we think is true. People are very cynical. There was this amazing moment when I made this argument in the Supreme Judicial Court in Massachusetts. The standard the Supreme Judicial Court would have applied was, is it conceivable that the initiative was constitutional? Is it conceivable? And what I said was, so that's basically, is it conceivable that the originalists on the Supreme Court would apply their standard consistently? Is that conceivable? Right. And one justice said, it's encouraging that you would think that the conservatives would apply their standard consistently. And with that statement,
I so understand that. I so understand that point of view.
Okay, yes. But your reaction was exactly the reaction of the whole bench. They all broke out in laughter, which was to me astonishing that they would be so open about their cynicism here. But I actually honestly believe that when they're given the chance, especially justices like Gorsuch, who've been, not hesitant to do things that don't seem, standard party line, they'll apply their principle in a consistent way. So that's why I think there's a chance it could even be unanimous that the court would say, regardless of the standard, yes, of course you can limit the dependence on these huge contributions to these independent political actors.
And you've at least got to make the attempt. Be cynical, fine. That's great, but you would at least have to try and let the circumstances, not your perspective, be what is limiting. At least attempt this, because if you don't try, so many people have told me to this in so many different contexts, you can't possibly succeed. At least make the effort, right?
Right.
Okay.
Cynicism is the laziest reaction in law and in many other contexts. And it's so hard to fight because it does seem rational. I'm not denying it seems rational. Indeed, when the Attorney General asked me, what do I think the expected view of most lawyers is about whether this would be constitutional or not? I said, look at the law. It's a perfectly reasonable thing to say that this is unconstitutional, but it's not. It's not under the principles of the Supreme Court. And we at least have to make the effort. And it's a big effort. It's probably going to cost multi-million dollars to be able to do an initiative petition. And though we all do our work, the legal work, for free, and, the Attorney General of Maine or Massachusetts would have to defend it. So it's not like anybody's being paid to do the legal work, but the organizational work and and the campaign to support it are not inexpensive. But it takes a lot. But, isn't it worth it? I mean, our democracy is fundamentally corrupted by this money. Yeah. Like nobody in Washington makes a decision without thinking, how are the super PACs going to react to this? And they don't do anything where there's a significant amount of money against them. And those super PACs are the most extreme, the most targeted. They've got single issues they're going to fight for. And it basically means you can't do anything in Washington because you're basically terrified that a missile is going to come down on top of you. And that's the super PAC missile. And so if we don't break this, forget climate change or healthcare or student loans or real infrastructure growth or the end to Empire America and the defense spending up the wazoo. None of that stuff is going to change until we get a political system where our representatives are allowed to listen to us. Listen to us and exclusively us, and not also have to be listening in their, to the money in their headphone.
This is certainly the key to unlocking that. If we don't get rid of the money one way or another, there's nothing that we can really do about those issues. And we do have some very pressing issues. I mean, the first one that you mentioned is climate change. The clock is ticking on that, so we really have to get on this fast. So we got to unlock those doors so that we can get access and control back over our political leadership and have them answer to us as opposed to massive amounts of money. So how can we help you? Where can we get more information about this competition? Where can we get more information about Equal Citizens?
Right. So if you just go to equalcitizens.us, so that's one word, and the domain and the TLD is .us. On our front page, there's a banner that will take you to the information about the competition. The competition gets launched on September 4th, on Labor Day, but you can start working now. Like all the information you need right now is there to be able to start working. And then it'll be all entries have to be received by Election Day 2023. So November, I think it's 4th this year. That's probably wrong. I think it's 6, something, whatever. I should know that. But it's on the page. So we will, and you can sign up to be informed as we are developing it and as the prize evolves. But the formal launch will be Labor Day, and the end will be Election Day, and shortly thereafter we'll have a winner. And I'm eager that we are able to celebrate creators who can make this legal argument effectively enough that even lawyers can understand it.
So equalcitizens.us, go there, take a look at the contest, boot up Premiere or whatever video editor you happen to use, and get cracking on this, because we got to get this through to attorneys and the legal structure across America so that we can unlock our political system, get the money out of politics, and get back to a place where we can actually start making progress, and maybe even save our planet in the meantime. Lawrence Lessig, thank you so much for being with us today on Facepalm America. All the best to you.
Thank you.
And I'm going to equalcitizens.us, and I'm reading from it here, listeners. Here's the message that is on the front page. We believe that every single issue we care about, from climate change to gun safety, from healthcare to military spending, cannot be fixed until we fix democracy first. That's absolutely correct. Maybe this isn't the right path. Maybe it is the right path. Either way, we should try it. So go to equalcitizens.us. Let's see what we can do. By hook or by crook, we've got to make this a country that we, the people, control. Thank you so much for listening today. I really appreciate your being here. Please share this episode with a friend. Please share it on social media. Tell them about Facepalm America. Spread the love. Spread the info. Go to facepalmamerica.com if you want to find out more, if you want to listen to past episodes. And until next time, enjoy the day.